So as we do each week, let's invoke God's presence. Let us pray. God, make us instruments of your grace. Weave us into a community showing forth your power and tenderness. Bless us and our differences, and undergird our courage to stand together. We call on you today to gather us in your love. Lead us to know you better and honor you on each step of the journey of our lives. In your name we pray. Amen. And as we do each week, and we will continue to do each week, I take this time of confession and say, think of something in your life that you'd like to change, improve, stop, start, whatever it is. Just give that a thought, one small thing that you'd like to challenge yourself with this week to take on, to be a better person. And with that, we'll have the confession. Lord, forgive me for the things I have done and not done. Forgive me for the things I've said and not said. Forgive me for the life I have lived and not lived, that I might reflect on the image of the one I profess to follow in thought, word, and deed, and in drawing my true self, draw others into that light. Amen. See, we get some congratulations in the chat there. That's nice. Do we have a volunteer who would like to do the readings today?
I could do the reading.
Thank you. Matthias is with Ellie in New Haven. Yay, it's good to see you, Ellie. I haven't seen you for a little bit, so it's wonderful. Hope Yale is treating you well. It's good to see you there. Okay, Matthias, do you want to do the readings?
Yes, right. Perfect. Genesis 15:18. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants, I give this land from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. Matthew 8:18. Jesus saw the crowd around him, so he gave his disciples orders to go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Then a teacher of the law came to him. He said, Teacher, I will follow you no matter where you go. Jesus replied, Foxes have dens, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. John 9:14. Then the disciples of John the Baptist came to Jesus, asking, Why do we and the Pharisees often fast as a religious exercise, but your disciples do not fast? And Jesus replied to them, Can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast. But no one puts a piece of unshrunk new cloth on an old garment, for the patch pulls away from the garment and a worse tear results. Nor is new wine put into old wineskins that have lost their elasticity. Otherwise the wineskins burst, and the fermenting wine spills, and the wineskins are ruined. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, so both are preserved. Swedenborg Insight, Secrets of Heaven, 1376. I have often talked with spirits about the idea they have of place and distance. They're not real, I tell them, but only look as though they were. On the contrary, space and distance are just changes in the state of your thoughts and feelings, which make themselves visible this way in the world of spirits. There is no such appearance in heaven among angels, since they have no concept of space and time, only of state.
Beautiful job, Matthias. Thank you. Now we'll have a sermon. So for the last few weeks, I've been filling up bags and boxes and leaving old places behind. As I've cleaned out my father's apartment, I returned to DC only to have to clean out my office. God is not being subtle with me about experiencing a time of beginnings and endings and the importance of spiritual space. Saying goodbye to old places is like saying goodbye to an old dear friend. Each paper you pick up reminds you of a lovely story as you painstakingly decide, do I keep it and do I throw it away? And if I throw it away, is that an act of disrespect? So today is our last day as our Swedenborgian community here praying, preaching, and sharing at 1611 16th. We say goodbye and we thank an old friend, this building, as we seek God's imagination in support of what's next. In today's reading, Jesus teaches us a profound lesson about beginnings and endings. Though we cling to the past, there comes a time to say goodbye to old wineskins and look for something else for the new wine. The challenge of our time is knowing what those new wineskins look like. What does it mean to create a spirituality of place for the next generation? A generation that has grown up in radically secular times. A generation that faces an epidemic of loneliness, to the point where the Surgeon General has issued an advisory outlining the devastating health effects of loneliness and isolation. It is literally killing us. Our current political crisis is downstream from our loneliness crisis. And whatever the results of this election in a few weeks, there are storm clouds ahead. We're losing places we all once gathered for human nourishment and community. Your presence in this church service, online and in person today, puts you outside the norm. Church services like this remain one of the last places where you gather with others outside your family, across generations, across worldviews. Spiritual spaces have been created to match the needs of their time. The Bible is a history of all these various spaces. In the Old Testament, God gives Abraham land and a temple and ultimately a kingdom, but it falls to ruin as Israel's conquered. You can't understand the importance of space in the Middle East right now if you don't understand the stories of the Jewish and Muslim people in terms of sacred space. In Jesus' time, the spiritual space is back at the temple again, but it's under Roman occupation. And what the Jewish people are hoping for is a leader who can defeat Rome and restore their space. And Jesus in his ministry honors the temple and holy space. He preaches in the temple, he cleanses it, but he offers this strange verse. Birds have nests, foxes have holes, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Jesus is teaching us there will always be something new. Change will be constant. We'll need to adjust. Our institutions and our sacred spaces must evolve to meet the need of new wine, shifting to new space. Over the coming centuries, Christian spiritual spaces evolved after Jesus' time, eventually building beautiful cathedrals where the attendees would actually stand in a large crowded space. The priest would speak a language that no one really understood, Latin, and it was so noisy from people having conversations that the priest actually rings a bell during the sacrament, and that's why there's a ringing of the bell, to get your attention. Hey, we're blessing, we're doing something important over here. Everybody stop for a second. And that was church. To an illiterate congregation, stained glass windows were teaching. That's how you learned. You couldn't read, so you looked at the windows and you were taught through pictures. Now, after the Reformation, congregations became to be able to read the Bible themselves, and stained glass moved from a very practical thing to a beautiful thing, and holy spaces focused more on the pulpit, where the wise pastor would pontificate. The new technology of that time was the printing press, and the Bible was for scholars, and you would find in churches libraries and reading rooms. By 1894, Church of the Holy City, this community imagined the needs of their current time. The stained glass and the architecture represented beauty, but people no longer relied on the stained glass alone to tell a story. They had a library, and the library at Church of the Holy City, right over here, was open to the public. Washingtonians could come and check out books during the week. Books were hard to find and they were expensive. And the library provided a reading room. As a congregation, when you were looking for a pastor, you started looking for a scholar. You wanted someone who would teach you intellectually. And so for the 1900s, this combination was a new wineskin for the new wine. At each evolution, faith communities tried holding on to old wineskins. Like our favorite shoe or that old sweater, we have a nostalgic feel to that comfort that we can experience in it. We resist letting it go. So we keep trying to patch old wineskins for the new wine until the wine starts leaking out. Now, I shared in my sermon a few weeks back that at one point I was deciding what would we do at the church. I felt so sad about the situation, what we would do. And I sat in the church and I went around every window and I looked at every name and I said the names aloud. I sat in the building and I said, what do we do? Gang, what do we do? And they said, we built this for our time. What are you building for your time? And I was clear that we needed to think about our time. And that question they raise is the question of our time. That's the challenge of this community and all of Christianity. The old is passing away. Wineskins are leaking. Nostalgia and comfort will keep us resisting this reality as we seek to hold on to a past instead of embracing the future. The challenge of our moment is a challenge of spiritual imagination. What do we need to build? Our ancestors in the Washington Society of the New Jerusalem imagined they could be torchbearers of a new church in the new world. They gathered first in people's homes, rented church halls, libraries, public venues. They finally got a property where the Senate office buildings now sit that was owned by George Washington. Then that burned down. Time for new wineskins. And prominent families in the community, like the Fairfaxes and the DuPonts, who had helped fund the church temple, as it was called, on Capitol Hill, began looking for a new space. And they looked to the outskirts of Washington, far away from the downtown hustle and bustle, all the way up on 16th Street at 1611 to find this location. And then after a decade, they built a parish house next door. In this space, they combined beauty, scholarship, and a place for people to gather. The holy space offered new wineskins for a new wine of their time, and their mission was successful. Yesterday, as I attended Katie and Jose's wedding here at the church, and it was, as I said, as lovely as they are beautiful people, and there was Jimmy Cox, who has managed these weddings for 30 years, providing his magic for this holy space. And as I sat out there as a congregant, I thought to myself, how many people have celebrated this most important day of their life in this space? How many weddings? How many memorial services? How many people were baptized? How many people found guidance in a sermon or inspiration from a concert or a hug during a coffee hour, or they met a new friend? In my 9 years pastoring here, I've experienced so many of these events myself that it's beyond my imagination the tens of thousands of souls who tasted a new wine in this wonderful wineskin. And by the time when I was taking over 9 years ago, there were a few stalwarts holding firm: Elfa Holloway, Malcolm Peck, Adrian Black, and Helen Sioris. Each worked to save this space for another day and this community for another day. The building had fallen on tough times through winds, rains, and even earthquakes. And as Alpha, who is here with us today, has shared with me in a note in the congregation, that she says, it's sad for me today, but this church has been my home for many years. It's where my husband, Rashid Holloway, received his resurrection service, and where my son, Hillel, went to Sunday school. It is with gratitude in my heart to all who sustain the church community and church work, and I look forward to a new era for Church of the Holy City in Washington, D.C. So how can we meet this new era? When I first began leading worship, we had a very formal English liturgy in Old English, King James. I preached in a white robe from the large pulpit, and very often to only 3 people, and a pianist. So we started asking attendees who came, what can we do to meet you on your spiritual path? They asked us, can you make the language more relevant? Can you make the services more understandable? Is there a way that there can be questions in the service itself? Can it be a little less formal? And when I asked young people what the biggest barrier to them of coming to the church, they often responded, church, the building. So many find magnetic, now frightened a generation who had a bad experience with the church. So as Church of the Holy City and the Washington Society of the New Jerusalem make its 3rd major journey, we leave behind a lovely space that served so many for so long. We leave in gratitude, thanking God for being here for us, and we ask God's blessing on the future congregations. We now face an exciting challenge of creating a new spiritual space in these tumultuous times. Where can we serve the needs of a rising generation that is so isolated and feels so lonely? What can we do to provide healing to a country where half the people in each political party wish that those in the opposite party were dead? Secular materialism, with its focus on success, wealth, and status that has had dominance in our culture for over a century, has left young people craving something more. They seek to feed their soul, and they don't know where to find it. They're not interested in going back to old church. They want something new. Young people rarely ask me questions of doctrine, but they do ask me, why do so many churches exclude gays, women, and condemn believers of other religions to hell? They want more inclusion. That's a message that we offer. They find the message of Jesus profound and refreshing, but are repelled by those who claim to speak in his name. Today, a generation that wasn't raised with much spirituality is asking the profound question, what is the purpose of life? What happens when we die? How do we pray? How do we grow our inner life? What's good? Am I included? Do my thoughts matter? Is it safe to ask questions here? New wine is demanding new wineskins. We can build on what we've learned from the past. Earlier churches used the technologies of their time, such as stained glass to teach visually, libraries to engage, and preaching to explain, and social halls to build community. And all of these are valuable to the next evolution of spiritual space. We can harness new technologies and create our new space. Swedenborg taught us that church is not a building, it's a state of being. It's tempting to fall in love with spaces, but that misses the point. Even holy spaces like our body will fail us one day, and only the Spirit continues. On his visits to heaven and hell, he reports of time and space in heaven. He says that it's basically, if you feel close to someone, you experience them right with you in that moment, directly. Time and space are transcended by our closeness. Now, when I was young, this concept was so hard for me to get into my materialistic head. How could you just get beyond time and space? In some way, I still don't get it. But during the pandemic, we experienced something along these lines. Our congregation was forced in 1 week to shift from physical space to virtual space. We broadcast online. Since then, we've done it, and we've had attendees from over 40 states and multiple countries around the world join us for worship. And those that don't join us on Sunday, join us during the week and email me with questions and comments from all over. There are many people in this congregation now who I have never physically met, nor had a chance to give a hug. Yet I feel I know you deeply, more deeply than people I see every day. On Friday at my dad's funeral, I shared one of the great blessings of this COVID crisis was that our church went online, and it gave my dad to be part of this community, something very special to me, for the last 4 years. Some of you even experienced his memorial service online. And if you missed it, Ross took some great notes. Thank you, Ross. Last week when I posted on Facebook news of my father's death, there were hundreds of old friends who sent me messages. Though virtual, I could feel the love and concern in each message. They were transcending time and space. Our new online technologies can bring us closer spiritually. This is something we have to incorporate in our new space. So what do we build? We need to create a home, an urban sanctuary where big questions can be asked and discussed, where there is no question that is shamed and no one feels shame. A spiritual space where everyone is welcome across generations. A place to help us improve our skills, engaging those from other perspectives. A place that teaches us how to develop compassion, to overcome contempt. A place that meets people wherever they are on their spiritual pilgrimage. And we must use our cutting-edge technologies of Zoom, podcast, and YouTube to provide a broadcasting space while creating a warm, loving physical space where humans can discuss important topics over meals, receive hugs, and find encouragement. A space where people who are long-distance members can spend the night when they come to DC. We need a space where busy members can escape the chaos that is Washington. That is the challenge of our times. How can each of us play a role in providing new wineskins for new wines? It will require courage and imagination to grow beyond our comfort zones. But we must work together to answer the question of our times that the elders posed to me. What will you build in your time? Our answer to this question offers all of us a chance to co-create with the divine and create a new spiritual space to the greatest use for God's love in the world. Amen. And at this time, we will open it up to questions. And if we have any questions from the congregation, I'm going to flip around my camera as the moving crews took my other camera already. So let me just start. If anybody has a question in the congregation, let's start there, and then we'll go to the online. Anybody here have a question? Huh? Yeah, if you don't, let me just flip. One of the things about this new space is that ministers have to learn how to manage technology. Okay. Let me just come back there and give you the microphone, all of Oprah Winfrey here. Very precarious. But I don't think it can go up.
Okay.
You can stand. No, you can stand.
Yeah. So you had talked about sacred spaces.
Yes.
And whether that's, where two people come to pray, their God is also, or obviously the space we're moving into. And also the Swedenborgian verse that place is something that transcends, that maybe goes with us. What are things that we can do to make a place more sacred? And I say that with the obvious fact that if we're moving into a new space, it's something I think we're all thinking about.
So great question. How do you make the space sacred? And I think that my quick answer, and of course I'm never quite sure, but I'll give my quick answer. I think it's the degree that we love each other and we really put that love into the world. That makes it sacred. It's not really blessings would be nice, prayers would be nice, a little sage might be good, putting up an icon will work. But the truth is, it's the degree that we love each other and that goes into, there's something of that goes into the world, either through our daily lives or we do something as a group. But what's going to make it sacred, I believe, is that it does become a unique space where people are not there for transactional purposes and not seen as transactional, but are truly loved and cared about regardless of who they are, where they come from, or what they believe. Does that make sense? I agree. Okay. Amen. All right. We got agreement on that one. Any other questions from people in the congregation? And I also want to welcome Bo, our real estate agent, who's managed all of this for us. And quick story about Bo is that he and I met when he invited me to help the homeless get their driver's license so they would have identities across the street at Foundry Methodist Church many years ago. And so it was great having a spiritual person involved in our real estate situation. So thank you, Bo. And Bo will be helping us find a new space. Any other questions from people seated in the congregation? Yes, Jamie.
Thank you. So you were talking about the role of the minister and how that, I guess, has changed over time.
Yes.
And the one that I kind of fixated on was like a scholar.
Yeah.
An interpreter. And maybe you said this, and I'm sorry if I just didn't catch it, but I wanted to ask if you could elaborate on what you see as that role going forward. So if we talk about this generation now and what their needs are and how we create a loving, sacred space, then what's the role of the minister in all that?
Good question, a question near and dear to my heart, because it really is, do I have a job in this next iteration? So is there any insurance for ministers? So one thing is, right now we're doing a dialogue, and we've been doing these after every Sunday, and it reflects, I think this reflects an evolution. Because in the past, I really wouldn't care what you thought. I'm the minister, I went to school, I studied this, I got it down. You are poorly educated on theology. I'm going to tell you what to believe. You're going to ask me theological questions. You're going to either go home and say, I didn't really believe him, but I'm going to say I did. And that was church. And when I tell ministers today that we do a dialogue every Sunday, a lot of times they go, like, wow, first of all, how about being put on the spot? Second of all, why? So I think that the role of the minister is more of a facilitator, like this discussion, than it is just the expert. Because during many of our services, we have a very highly educated congregation. People have Googled things during the service and said, actually, it was 1364 BC that happened. So I mean, there's not a question you can't not really look up within seconds that would have taken a scholar years of studying to tell the congregation. So that world we're flat in a good way, and we're democratized. But I think people still have some questions. The challenge, I think, for ministers too, is getting used to the role that, I answer these questions on theology, and what do I know? I'm doing the best I can. So I think ministers, you don't want to create gurus who have all your answers. The answers to your spiritual life are in your path with God. Hopefully the minister can facilitate that wherever you are, but they don't have the answers. They have some answers from their experience, but they don't have it. So I think that's going to be the role of facilitator more than lecturer. Does that answer your question? It does. Do I still have a job? People are shaking their head no. Maybe. I don't know. Okay. Any other questions? These are good ones. Jason? Do you want to try? Well, you're a newscaster, so why don't you use your booming voice, and I'll repeat the question.
Where is this church on the spectrum of the larger congregation in terms of what you're discussing and how you want to move forward, evolve? Is the congregation nationally making some of the same moves, and what do they think of this?
So the question is, what's the denomination think, or the bigger church? Since we have someone from Wilmington, maybe they can tell us. But I think that this is new. I think there's still a bit of grabbing on the old wineskins. It's very natural. Like, this is what we have, this is what we did, and this is the measure of our success. I know that when we were thinking about selling, I definitely felt a feeling of failure. So when you feel that, you go, okay, let's just hang on to it. Let's kick the can down the road. So I think there's a grieving process and a loss process. But in our denomination, we have just sold our New York church. Our flagship church in California was made of glass called Wayfarer's Chapel, had to be taken down because of erosion in the mountains of California. And it was just an incredibly beautiful church that did 2 weddings every day. And so there's a message, I think, in all this that we have to look at new ways to do it. But I think, I think generationally people are, this is church. Church is this building. And so I think there will be some grieving process. Hopefully if we can do something extremely positive in the future, I think it gives ministers who are who are clinging to their old wineskins to say, oh, there's a way forward for me. So hopefully we can show a path. Any other questions? Okay.
You want to brag about what Jim Lawrence said in terms of this being the most active congregation?
One of our president in a recent conversation was noting like how active the newsletter is, how active things. We just, last year, 9 new members, then we baptized 3 people. And so and people also, those of you who are under like 35, you're 40, you're an anomaly in church. So that's which is really awesome. So yeah, there's a lot of exciting growth here. They're excited about it. Our president right now is extremely supportive of what we're doing.
Denomination.
Yeah, president of the denomination. Okay, so that was any final questions from the audience here in the live studio audience? Okay. Let me switch over to our folks online. Okay. Any questions here? Roxanne.
So this is kind of to address Jason's comment, because as you know, I'm hoping to be ordained within convention, and I'm now at the place where I have to develop a plan for ministry. So if anybody would like to have conversations with me about that, I believe in innovation, you know, as a trained scientist, it is about innovation and kind of studying outcomes and things of that nature. And yeah, so I'm trying to think about and find new ways to be church. And Matthias, I'd like to talk to you sometime if you folks are up there in New Haven, because that's where I grew up. So it would be nice to meet up with you at some point.
Yeah, thank you. Well, he's not there yet. Ellie is up there at school, and he's up there for the weekend. We're still roping him in activities here in DC in the meantime. So yeah, if you have if your thoughts, Roxanne is literally living the question that Jamie asked. What's it look like out there? And to the point that Jason said, what's the denomination think about it? Good questions. Matthias.
Yeah, so I had a question. First of all, I think both Ellie and I really loved the service, and as usual, we felt very healed, and it was really beautiful. My question was, do you think that there is still kind of spiritual value to like being physically present with one another and that kind of physical proximity? And how do we and do we want to preserve that in like a new physical space? And how do we balance that with the reality that community and church is also, with the internet and things like that, like has expanded and geography doesn't matter as much anymore? Like, is it important to balance those things?
I think it's important to balance it. I think there's nothing that replaces physical connection. And I'll just say that, so we have these services, a lot of times we go out to dinner afterwards. I will say the conversations over dinner are equally exciting for me as the worship service. So there's something about just catching up with people. People share things on the fly. So I think yes. So I think we want to do physical space. The question is balance, and that's a really good question, because I'll tell you, it's not easy. Local people often say, sometimes I feel like you're talking to the people online, not to us. And then people online say, boy, I really wish I could have joined you for dinner. I don't get to meet with that way. What about including other, how do we get included? So I think that's the challenge of our time. How do you marry it up? I think your generation, Matthias, is learning that there's a thinness to virtual space that at the end of the day, and then there's something powerful about space. I know that a lot of companies right now are telling me that they're actually having to teach college graduates eye contact and human interaction at very basic levels, because they haven't socially connected with other people very much, and within seconds they're down, like they're looking at their phone. So I think that it's a challenge we're going to have to face, is how do we, this beautiful spiritual virtual world that we have and the physical world, and how can we do both? And I imagine we would have retreats at this new space, if it's big enough, for people who are visiting and so forth, and have a place for people to crash when they're from out of town, and build things that way. That's my best guess. It will be a balancing act. And I think it will evolve as we just keep listening to what people say, and we keep changing. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions from? Roxanne has another question. Just let's see if we can get anybody else in here. Get right back to you. Any other? No other? Okay. Joy.
Well, I'm very glad that I was able to get to this last service in a place that I only visited once. I am sad because I had hoped to see it again as this church, and I'm glad that this congregation is doing something much needed, and that is incorporating cyberspace into its sacred space of belonging. And I look forward to where your journey takes you next.
Thank you. I like that line, cyberspace and sacred space. I'm going to come right back to Roxanne. I just want to see if I got any other questions, comments. Might be interesting to hear from our president. If you have any thoughts. Do I see Chris Leitner's hand up?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Chris.
Hi. Well, the truth is that, I've had an opportunity to see many different iterations of several of our churches, and certainly the concept of community continues as central. I was just thinking, actually, it's a funny thing, you know, we have an odd situation in Massachusetts where we have two churches that are literally almost across the street from each other, which is terribly unusual for us. But nevertheless, in East Bridgewater, we have what was the Elmwood New Church, which had to be torn down because it was no longer safe. And then we also have the Bridgewater Church. And the Bridgewater Church is, ancient and wooden and all that kind of thing. And the new Elmwood Church kind of looks a lot like an office building. And they did that on purpose because they knew when they built something new that they needed a space that would accommodate a congregation of about maybe 75 max, but also could be useful for the community to use for a variety of things. And I'm sure that somebody has kept track of what's going on there, but I am delighted to know that both of those churches survive at this point because they serve different purposes. And I think that what I'm hearing you say, as you guys are looking for things, I I'm old enough to remember like the SSR in Newton, and yeah, like I could be a traveler and I could be going somewhere and I would be able to stay there because it was this big, beautiful old house. And I think that you have the right idea because I think community is the future. It's a uh, I think it was Diana Butler Bass said you have to switch things around. They had like a believer belonging kind of thing, and she said no. She said you got to start with the belonging because you have to start with this is like a what do you call it? Christianity after religion or something like, or religion after Christianity. I don't remember what the title was exactly, but it's, yeah, you need a place where people can gather together, be good with community, uh, be perhaps centered, that someone needs to be some kind of a leader, but nevertheless, it's the community. And I think that you all have exactly the right idea. So more power to you.
Thank you. And for those who don't know, Chris Leitner was the first female president of our denomination. Okay, Jason, you have your hand up, so I'll repeat your question.
I know this is an emotionally wrought process for you, but it's not just that, it's also time consuming. A lot of labor has taken gone into this, or required us, whom else would we offer some gratitude for the work they're putting into this transition?
So Jason says he realizes it's a difficult time of change, and a lot of people are putting a lot of time into it, and who can we offer support and thanks to? And our board has really been managing it. Dr. Peck is here, Annabelle's online, Matthias is on the board, Tony is on the board. So our board has been, they behind the scenes have been handling all the crazy machinations of what it is to buy and sell a property in Washington, D.C., thanks to Bo's help too, to make it all happen. But Dr. Peck is our church patriarch, who has the longest history of anybody, was here from the 80s, and has been advising us, I think, through this whole process. And then of afar, Alpha Holloway, who's here, and I quoted in my sermon, who's now living in Germany, but held the church together for many, many years through critical times. And so it's all the people that held it together, and then in the moment. And I have to reiterate, thanks to Jimmy Cox, who at 30 years old became the wedding coordinator, and he's been here ever since. So he's seen everything and done everything, and he's been, I will say, my right hand and critical player. So, and then just all of you for showing up. We're going to go to something new and exciting. It's going to be great. I have no doubt about that, but it's only going to be great because it's got great people involved. So that's how I would say it. Dr. Peck, did you want to share some of your thoughts? Yeah, Dr. Peck has a few thoughts he'd like to share, so we're going to have that right now. And then we'll go back to the questions.
Can I seat myself?
Yeah, can you come right here? Come around this way. You just sit here.
Okay. Well, thank you, Rich. It's not easy to say goodbye to this beloved and beautiful place, this sacred space, this cherished home. Memories of 4 decades come rushing back, recalling dear friends long past and ministers who dedicated themselves to keeping alive the Swedenborgian presence in the nation's capital, where the truths of our faith were first introduced more than 2 centuries ago. I also have very personal thoughts because this is the church in which my wife and I renewed our vows after 25 years of marriage, having been first married in the Swedenborgian Church in Boston, and Rich presided over a moving memorial service for Ida on what would have been her 80th birthday, May 18, 2024. I'll miss the magnificent symmetry of the Gothic architecture and the luminous beauty of the stained glass windows. Humankind's temples of worship have always reflected the efforts of the greatest artists to achieve the supreme expression of their craft. That is why this physical space can transport us to a special spiritual place. Why we feel closest to the divine when we are here. Our church is, in a sense, an external metaphor for the inner truths that sustain us. And when a handful of members, Alpha Holloway leading the way, determined to do all in our power to keep our church, resisting the demands of the denomination that it be sold, we did so because we realized that selling Church of the Holy City with no place to go would terminate not just our physical presence in Washington, but would end the spiritual presence as well. Happily, as Rich has indicated, our persistence enabled us to reach the present point of transition, whereby we do not merely survive, but embrace an exciting new chapter in our history, one that promises to give new meaning to our name of New Church.
Thank you, Dr. Peck. Beautifully eloquent as always. What a joy you are. Roxanne, did you have a quick question before we wrap up questions?
No, it's a comment, and I hope that we are exquisitely sensitive to the idea of creating a space. This is something that I'm really doing a lot of research and will be a part of my ministry, is that some part of wherever you end up going will be a place of where you can enter into awe and wonder, and just exquisite sensitivity to the idea of beauty. That's my hope.
That's a beautiful hope, because the hope, beauty is incredibly important. So we have to find a beautiful space too. So, well, thank you. Thank you for all the questions and comments. I love this part of the service. And here we are. We wrap up our discussion here now in this space.